Hello and welcome to this instalment of the Lafayette Club's online lecture series. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by Miss Harriet Wistrich. Miss Wistrich is a solicitor of 25 years and has acted in many high-profile cases around violence against women, including on behalf of women appealing murder convictions for killing abusive partners. She's a founding member of Justice for Women and the founder and director of the Centre for Women's Justice, whose mission is to hold the state to account and challenge discrimination in the justice system around male violence against women and girls. She has received several honours in the legal field, including the Liberty Human Rights Lawyer of the Year Award 2014. Ms. Wistrich, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
To start us off, could you give us a little insight into your career as a solicitor, as well as the feminist campaign groups you founded?
I didn't initially train to be a solicitor. I did a philosophy degree, and I kind of went into other areas of work. And it was in my early 30s that I decided to become a lawyer, or decided to train to be a lawyer. And part of the reason for that was that I was involved in feminist campaigning, and in particular around the issue of women who killed their violent partners. And that was in the early 1990s. And through that campaigning work, it was clear there was a need for lawyers who had an insight into domestic violence and abuse. And so I decided to take what was then known as the CPE, which was a law conversion course, and then subsequently to train to be a solicitor.
So when you look back to the genesis of Justice for Women, which started with the cases of Sarah Thornton and Emma Humphreys, both of whom had killed their partners after suffering prolonged abuse and were facing life sentences, which were successfully overturned. How do you feel about the progress that's been made? It seems like we've made such headway, especially thanks to the work that you and the organisations you've founded have done. And yet cases like the aforementioned ones still persist, often with unjust results, such as the one seen very recently in the news involving Emma Jane Magson.
Yeah. It seems like every time we feel we may have made progress and hit our mark and that potentially made changes to the law, that it doesn't seem to remain very long in the memory that where those issues have been highlighted in the media before we see continued injustices. The most recent one, which was absolutely shocking and I think illustrates a level of misogyny still within the criminal justice system, was a case of Emma Jane Magson. It wasn't one of the cases I brought personally, but it was one that was supported by the campaign group Justice for Women. And that case was successful at appeal because of the evidence of mental diminished responsibility, if you like, and evidence of abuse that this young woman had suffered. Although the Court of Appeal overturned the conviction, the jury at her retrial reconvicted her of murder with a 10-2 majority. And from what I gather about that case, it was in spite of evidence of her being beaten up just before the fatal wounding, and in spite of evidence of strangulation marks to her neck, in spite of evidence of the deceased's bad character, and in spite of a whole range of things. It is very, very hard to understand how a jury could convict. I mean, the damaging evidence in that particular case was that she lied when she, and she didn't inform the police, didn't inform the ambulance immediately, and that obviously didn't go down very well with the family or anybody, understandably. But it's not something that would make somebody guilty of intent to kill without any mitigating circumstances. So it's a pretty shocking case, and a reminder that whatever we achieve, like in the Sally Challen case a couple of years earlier, it doesn't mean that translates into justice delivered in other cases. We undertook at the Centre for Women's Justice a major piece of research into women who kill in order to try and understand the various factors that led to so many what we see as miscarriages of justice. And ultimately this boils down to, first and foremost, a lack of understanding of domestic abuse and a lack of understanding of why women fear for their lives often, and why they act in the way that they do, why they remain, many myths and stereotypes surrounding domestic abuse victims, like why would they remain in a relationship if they were really being abused? And those working in the field will understand the reasons.
So do you think education is sort of the way forward then?
Well, certainly, we need a cultural change in terms of our understanding of abuse generally, and challenging kind of stereotypes and misogyny across the board. As far as the criminal justice system goes, I mean, if there is that cultural change, one would hope that it would also filter through to people working in the criminal justice system. Criminal justice system, has incorporated amendments to laws and guidance around how the proper approach should be. But what we find again and again is that's not applied, and I think part of the reason is that there is not the understanding and the insight, and perhaps not the training that will make criminal justice actors actually take on board the learning that we who work directly with victims and survivors know and understand about the dynamics of these sorts of abuse, and why women might act in such situations.
So in the past few years, we've seen a sharp rise in the number of rape cases in the UK, and yet the proportion of cases that make it to court is lower than ever. Your campaign group, the Centre for Women's Justice, recently brought a challenge in the courts against the Crown Prosecution Service's rape charge policy. Could you talk about this and why our justice system is failing rape victims?
Yeah, so I don't think there's necessarily, we don't know if there's an increase in actual rape, but what we know is that there has been an increase over the last 10 years in women coming forward to report rapes. There's been an increase in the volume of cases reported. We know that that's only a small proportion of those actual rapes that take place, because it's estimated that perhaps only 15% of those that are raped will report it. So it doesn't reflect the scale. But what we've seen is that of those cases reported, only a tiny number result in being actually charged and prosecuted. And the challenge that we brought, so Centre for Women's Justice represented the End Violence Against Women Coalitions, a separate organisation. So they were the claimant, we were their lawyers, if you like. And the challenge was against the Director of Public Prosecutions. What we argued was that about 4 or 5 years ago, the CPS changed their approach or changed their policy in relation to the prosecution of rape by basically letting go of something known as the merits-based approach to decision making. And it was a relatively subtle change, which was rolled out across their prosecutors. They're called RASO prosecutors, rape and serious sexual offence prosecutors. But it was the message was given that don't overdo it, and let's take the weaker cases out of the system in order to improve the conviction rate, i.e. in order to get more convictions, the easiest way of doing that is to take weaker cases out of the system. And the consequence of that is, and here there is undisputed evidence that there was a dramatic fall in the volume of cases charged and prosecuted. We attributed that primarily to the approach taken by the head of the CPS 4 or 5 years ago. Ultimately, the Court of Appeal rejected our case, and that was a couple of weeks ago, in a deeply disappointing decision, which failed to really engage with the evidence that we'd put forward. But I think that we really kind of won in the court of public opinion. So I think in terms of the coverage and the concerns raised, most people are very concerned by what's been going on with the CPS. And I think to some extent the impact of bringing that challenge has caused not a reversal, but a kind of pulling back from that very hard approach. So and trying to introduce new measures to try and improve prosecution. So ultimately, the case, despite the fact that we have lost it, I think has produced some good results, which means that, losing a case isn't always, kind of just a clear loss. It can be a positive thing in some ways.
Now, if we look at rape cases that do make it to court, and in particular those subject to Scots law, we see a lot of instances where defendants are acquitted, not because a not guilty verdict is reached, but rather a not proven verdict is reached. There's a campaign to abolish this not proven verdict being led by a former St Andrews student known as Miss M, who's a rapist, received a not proven verdict despite the fact that she won a civil case against them. Would you be able to talk about the implications of this not proven verdict and why it poses such a problem?
Well, not proven isn't something that we have in English and Welsh law. So it is peculiar to the Scottish system. I think I suppose the point is, and I don't know probably quite enough about the impact of it, but you have a balance of probabilities where you might say, on the balance of probabilities was somebody raped, and then you have the criminal standard, which is beyond reasonable doubt. And so you might have a case where you weren't able to overcome that relatively high hurdle in rape cases, but it's not quite the same as not guilty, perhaps, which is that they just don't accept it's a criminal offence. So I'm probably not the person to speak too authoritatively about that, because it's not something we've kind of directly engaged with in terms of the Scottish system.
Okay. In July 2020, the Instagram page St Andrews Survivors was set up with the aim of giving a voice to victims of sexual violence. It quickly garnered thousands of followers as hundreds of survivors' testimonies came flooding in. And I think that, depressingly, this prevalence of sexual violence in St Andrews wasn't very surprising for most students. But what I personally hadn't realised was just how difficult it is and has been for survivors to receive help, support, and proper guidance from the university, which was rightly criticised following the advent of St Andrews Survivors. Do you think that there's a way in which criminal justice agencies and universities can change so as to eradicate some of the friction between them and work better in tandem, and ultimately do a better job of helping student survivors achieve justice?
Well, I mean, there are two different things going on there. One is the criminal justice system, and we know that criminal justice bringing a case, you have a quite high threshold to achieve in order to bring a criminal case. I do think that there are a lot of improvements that could be made to police investigation and CPS decision making to improve outcomes and the prospects of bringing criminal charges. It's such a tiny number. I mean, the cases we see that are rejected for prosecution are really shocking, some of them, and involve, sometimes, men that appear to be very dangerous or serial offenders and so on. And you know, I do think there are a whole range of things that can be done to improve those sorts of outcomes in the criminal justice system. We've actually contributed to a report. It's a shadow rape report, working together with the Rape Crisis Organisation and End Violence Against Women Coalition and IMCAN, and that's available on our website if people are interested to have a look at it, which looks at recommendations for improving criminal justice outcomes. Now, the second part of your question really is about what happens in universities. And also, interestingly, you know, I'm sure everyone will be aware of the current debate that's just hit the news in the last few days around schools and you know, sexual violence and harassment of within school children. And there are I think one of the important lessons around universities and schools is that even where a criminal justice charges aren't brought, and as I've highlighted, they are difficult to bring because of the very high threshold you have to reach from an evidential point of view in order to pursue a prosecution. That doesn't mean that because there's no charge, that there's no evidence on the balance of probabilities, for example, that somebody has been a victim of sexual assault. So, for example, if a woman reports a rape within, you know, by a fellow student, and that is proves difficult to bring to trial, that doesn't mean that she's lied or that she shouldn't be believed or supported. And and there are additional safeguarding concerns for that woman. So if she's in university and so is the man that she's accused, you know, she may feel intimidated and frightened to continue her studies. And there are things that universities should be doing in any event to deal with allegations where they are made by one student towards another, and safeguarding issues. Certainly in schools, you know, the schools have a duty to safeguard children, but you know, students are also young people and often very vulnerable. And there are a range of things, including obviously support services for students, even where criminal justice solutions are an option.
So in recent news, we've seen the tragic murder of Sarah Everard, and the survey conducted by UN Women UK that found that 97% of women aged 18 to 24 have experienced some form of sexual harassment. While these are separate stories, their concurrence precipitated something of a moral panic regarding men's treatment of women in the UK, or rather, the lack of action from otherwise decent men that witness instances of sexual harassment towards women. Now, the narrative has been that change needs to come from men. Men need to do better to criticize sexual harassment or misogynistic behavior when they see it. And I think that such a cultural shift is the only real way to foster an equitable future for all genders. That being said, though, from a legal perspective, even if just as a means to an end, what can be done to firefight this epidemic of sexual harassment?
Yeah, well, I think again, it clearly reflects a deeply misogynistic culture that says that nearly all women have experienced a form of sexual harassment, particularly young women, it would seem. I mean, it's not, you know, it's not unique to young women, but it's obviously very, very prevalent at the moment. And, you know, the causes of that may be, you know, I mean, I think it was certainly more common when I was younger as well, but, you know, so young women do get it harder, I think. And that's sort of an outcome of a very kind of laddish culture, and clearly I'm sure the widespread, very, very widespread availability now of you know, really nasty misogynistic pornography on everyone's devices cannot help but you know, kind of create a climate where it's perfectly acceptable to be, you know, completely abusive and towards women. So That's the context for it. There are forms of harassment that amount to criminal offences, and they're not often investigated or prosecuted, but they do exist, and offences exist, and there may be a case for creating more criminal offences. But in terms of challenging it, I mean, that is something that clearly, you know, men should take responsibility for as well, in challenging their peer groups, challenging their peers, and calling it out when they see it. And you know, men who've done that are often, you know, also ostracized. So there needs to be, you know, kind of you know, it needs to become something that is you know, a positive thing to do. And you know, for the ostracizing to happen to those who are responsible and perpetrators. So there needs to be a cultural shift in that way. And that you know, institutions need to put in place measures also to you know, short of criminal justice solutions, which hold abusers accountable in that way, you know, and harassers accountable. So that needs to be strengthened, I think, in non-criminal justice solutions as well.
Okay, so for my second final question, I'd like to know if you're optimistic regarding the future of the justice system and its treatment of women.
Well, it's difficult to be optimistic, I would say, because you know, I've been fighting this battle for the last 30 years, and I've seen some improvements, but not nearly enough, nearly fast enough. And so it's quite hard to have faith that that things are really going to improve and change. But with these conversations happening at the moment, and with the spotlight on it at the moment, it's an opportunity to seize and to raise awareness and to try and create change. You know, the problem obviously is that we had the Me Too thing about 3 years ago, which seemed like a moment. And then, you know, nothing much changed. And then, you know, we have this even more kind of alarming kind of developments happening, you know, 3 years later. So, you know, that makes it hard to be optimistic. But the alternative is far too bleak. So, you know, we have to keep fighting, and we have to engage everybody in a battle to try and change things. And you know, and that is our only option, that we keep fighting, we keep engaging, and you know, we hope that gradually things will change. And things have changed if you look over the last 40 years. I mean, there was no acknowledgement at all, for example, that child abuse existed or that domestic violence existed. And you know, things were worse and things have improved. And so, you know, there's every chance that things can continue to improve. But, you know, we do see that where measures are introduced to improve things, there's always inevitably a backlash where things move backwards. So we just have to keep hanging on in there and pushing.
So naturally, all of the previous questions have been pretty heavy, although of course very important things. So I thought we could finish on a somewhat of a lighter note. I know during your time at university you were involved in street theatre with a feminist outfit, and then later on you're involved in filmmaking.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you had any favorite feminist films that you could recommend to our subscribers.
Feminist films. Well,
I know that's quite a loose term.
I had no prep for that question. There were some very old films around in the day, like A Question of Silence, which was a really interesting film made in the early 80s. I remember had quite an impact at the time. And you know, these were some of the really early feminist films, or Take It Like a Man and things like that. More recently, I very much enjoyed the series, was it on Netflix or BBC, about Mrs. America, which was a really interesting tale about the development of the the fight for the Equal Rights Amendment in the United States, the retelling of the Miss World protests. If people saw that film, where the women sabotaged a Miss World competition in early 1970s. So those are kind of historical films. But I'm sure there are some really, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I can't think of any at the moment, but I'll let you know when they come back to me. There are some good, some really good feminist films, which I evade my memory at the moment. And more of them at the moment. There's quite a lot going on, more recently, which is quite exciting.
Well, thank you so much for that. The work you're doing continues to be of the utmost importance, and I'm really grateful that you took the time to share some of your expertise with myself and our followers. So thanks.
Not at all, and pleasure to meet you and be able to discuss these matters. So good luck to everybody who's looking forward to trying to make things better in society and for women, and bring about legal change and other political change. So yeah, go for it. Don't hold back.